Folks, it's happening. Reform UK's Ben Habib has dropped a bombshell on GB News, and if his prediction holds true, the UK could face a sovereign debt crisis within the next 6 to 9 months. Yes, you heard that right. Economic catastrophe is on the horizon, and the latest figures from the Office for National Statistics only add fuel to this alarming fire. Before we dive into the details, check out this explosive clip of Ben Habib issuing his stark warning on GB News.
You don't grow an economy by taxing it and over-regulating it. And since Labour came to power, we talk about the taxation, but actually their regulations have sprouted all over the place. If you read the King's speech, it's a plethora of business constraining regulations. And of course, the last budget was extremely constraining on business. In fact, they targeted largely the private sector. The employment, the national insurance, employers' national insurance, the increase wasn't levied on the public sector workers. It was targeted entirely on the private sector. And if you believe, as I do correctly, in my view, that it's the private sector that generates the wealth of this country, and if you go after it with excessive taxation, as government after government has done, leaving us now with the highest tax burden as a proportion of GDP since World War II, you will eventually kill the goose that lays the golden egg. And we saw an immediate impact on the British economy from her budget. Hiring went through the floor. And she kept saying, this is not going to impact workers, this is going to impact businesses. The first thing that happened was an impact on workers. And of course, if people are laid off, you lose, the Exchequer loses the revenue that it thought it was going to get, and it picks up a burden because it's got to pay more in benefits. Actually, I know you want to go to Tom, but I think the position is much worse than us going into recession. We're undoubtedly going into a recession, but that recession is going to come with a weakening pound, imported inflation anyway, high interest rates, and a downward spiral, which will make it difficult for the government to finance its own needs. I think we are facing, in 6 to 9 months' time, a sovereign debt crisis for the United Kingdom.
The warning couldn't come at a more precarious moment. Just as Brits are bracing themselves for a long and tough winter, new data from the ONS confirmed what many had feared. The UK economy is stuck in neutral. Between July and September, economic growth stagnated, flatlining instead of delivering even the modest 0.1% growth originally forecast. This small revision has had enormous implications, sending shockwaves through the markets and igniting debates across the political spectrum. The revised figures highlighted troubling performances in key sectors, with industries like bars, restaurants, and legal services underperforming. Advertising, a bellwether for economic optimism, also struggled. ONS Director Liz McKeown attributed the dismal figures to slower-than-expected recoveries in these areas, leaving little room for optimism as the UK edges closer to the new year. But for Ben Habib, the problem runs much deeper than 1 quarter of flatlining GDP. Speaking on GB News, he painted a grim picture of an economy locked in a downward spiral. A weakening pound, high interest rates, and stubbornly high levels of imported inflation have created what he described as a toxic cocktail of pressures. For the UK, he warns, this mix could prove catastrophic, especially for a government already grappling with massive spending obligations and a restless electorate. Habib's most startling claim? That the UK is heading straight for a sovereign debt crisis. Within 6 to 9 months, he predicts, the government will face monumental challenges in financing its debt, a crisis that could force the country into dramatic fiscal measures, possibly even austerity 2.0, and he's not alone in raising the alarm. Many economists have expressed concerns over Britain's growing debt-to-GDP ratio, warning that the government's current trajectory is unsustainable. Critics of current government policies are becoming increasingly vocal, and Habib is at the forefront of that charge. In his GB News appearance, he lambasted what he called excessive taxation and regulation, blaming these policies for suffocating growth. With taxes now at their highest level as a percentage of GDP since World War II, the burden on individuals and businesses alike has reached breaking point, he argued. Instead of stimulating growth, these measures are, according to Habib, dragging the UK economy deeper into stagnation. One of the most troubling aspects of the current economic climate, according to Habib, is the impact on hiring. Despite government assurances that employment figures remain stable, he claims hiring is going through the floor, a stark contradiction to official narratives. Businesses, he explained, are hesitant to expand or invest under the weight of rising costs and economic uncertainty. The government, however, has not been silent in the face of these criticisms. Chancellor Rachel Reeves has defended her administration's economic approach, describing it as focused on delivering sustainable, long-term growth. She emphasized the difficulty of reversing over a decade of economic mismanagement, particularly in the aftermath of the COVID-19 pandemic and Brexit. But Reeves's statements have done little to quell the mounting unease. For many, the promise of sustainable growth feels too vague, too distant, to provide comfort in the here and now. Instead, the opposition argues, immediate action is needed to reverse the tide of economic stagnation and avoid the kind of crisis Habib is warning about. While the economic news dominates headlines, political rumblings in the background could add a whole new layer of complexity to this situation. Reform UK, led by Nigel Farage, is on the rise, with membership numbers surging to nearly overtake the Conservative Party. In an unprecedented move, the party recently unveiled a live membership tracker, showing just how quickly they are gaining ground. With nearly 124,000 members and growing, Reform UK's momentum is undeniable, and their economic messaging, focused on cutting taxes, slashing regulation, and returning to what they call common-sense politics, is resonating with a growing segment of the population. Farage himself has seized the moment, meeting with high-profile figures like Elon Musk and securing promises of donations from several billionaire supporters. Reform UK Treasurer Nick Candy has promised a political disruption like we've never seen before, suggesting that the party's financial resources could soon outstrip those of its rivals. If Reform UK continues on its current trajectory, it could become a major player in British politics, potentially reshaping the landscape in ways that few could have predicted just a few years ago. As Reform UK's star rises, the traditional parties appear to be struggling to maintain their footing. Labour, despite its recent electoral success, has seen its membership numbers dwindle to their lowest in a decade. Meanwhile, the Conservatives face their own existential crisis, with grassroots support waning and leadership failing to inspire confidence among voters. This political upheaval is unfolding against the backdrop of an increasingly dire economic forecast, creating a perfect storm of uncertainty and volatility. For ordinary Brits, the combination of economic stagnation, political realignment, and global instability is creating an atmosphere of anxiety and frustration. Many are looking to the government for answers, but so far, solutions seem elusive. As we move into 2024, the stakes could not be higher. Will the government take bold action to address the looming crisis, or will it continue on its current path, hoping for a turnaround that may never come? And what role will emerging forces like Reform UK play in shaping the nation's future? One thing is certain, the months ahead will be critical in determining the course of Britain's economy and politics. For now, all eyes are on the government and its ability, or inability, to navigate these turbulent times. Habib's warning is a sobering reminder that the margin for error is shrinking, and the consequences of failure could be devastating.